Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Shattered Mirror. Trent Holloway never believed in premonitions until that rainy Tuesday when a chill ran down his spine during a business meeting. The successful architectural firm owner excused himself to check his phone, finding 3 missed calls from his mother. When he finally connected with her, her words demolished his world. "Trent, it's Bryce. There's been an accident on Mount Rainier." His identical twin brother, the daredevil who'd never met a cliff he wouldn't climb or a risk he wouldn't take, had apparently slipped during a solo hiking expedition. The search and rescue team found a body at the bottom of a ravine, the face unrecognizable from the fall, but the wallet, backpack, and distinctive titanium watch confirmed it was Bryce. Trent's hands trembled as he canceled meetings and drove home through the Seattle downpour. He and Bryce had been inseparable growing up, complementary forces, with Trent the calculating planner and Bryce the impulsive thrill-seeker. Though they'd taken different paths in adulthood, their bond remained unbreakable. Or so Trent had thought. His wife, Vivian, was waiting at their lakeside home, her striking figure silhouetted against the picture window. 5 years together, and sometimes Trent still couldn't believe she'd chosen him. The former interior designer had collaborated on several of his firm's projects before they'd fallen in love, or what he believed was love. "I made some calls," she said, embracing him. "The funeral home is handling everything. You don't need to identify the body. Your parents have taken care of it." Trent nodded, grateful yet hollow. "I need to see him, Viv." "The coroner advised against it," she replied, steering him toward the leather sofa. "They said the damage was extensive. Better to remember him as he was." Something in her tone struck Trent as odd, but grief clouded his perception. He retreated into memories, recalling how Bryce had been acting strangely during their last meeting 3 weeks earlier. Distracted, checking over his shoulder, asking peculiar questions about Trent's marriage and parents. "Everything all right between you and Vivian?" Bryce had asked. "Never better," Trent had answered automatically, though, truthfully, things had been strained. Vivian had been distant, taking mysterious calls, disappearing for hours with vague explanations. Now, as Trent sank into numbing grief, he didn't notice Vivian slipping away to make another private call, her whispers too low to hear from the living room. "It's done," she murmured to someone. "He doesn't suspect anything." When she returned, her sympathy seemed perfect, practiced, but Trent was too consumed by loss to register the hollowness behind her eyes. The next morning, Trent's childhood friend and current business partner, Dominic Russo, arrived with coffee and solidarity. Dom had grown up with the twins, understood their connection, and seemed genuinely devastated. Yet when the conversation turned to the funeral arrangements, Dom appeared unusually interested in the details of Bryce's will. "Did he ever update it?" Dom asked casually. "After your parents transferred the family property to both of you." Trent frowned. "Why would that matter now?" Dom backpedaled quickly. "Just thinking about you, man. Making sure everything's in order during this nightmare." As preparations for the funeral progressed, Trent found himself isolated in his grief. His parents, Preston and Martha Holloway, handled most arrangements with uncomfortable efficiency. His mother couldn't look him in the eye, which he attributed to how much he resembled Bryce, while his father seemed oddly resolute, almost impatient for the proceedings to conclude. The night before the funeral, Trent found himself alone in his home office, staring at the last photo taken of him and Bryce. Arms around each other at Thanksgiving, identical grins beneath different haircuts. As he traced his brother's face, a notification pinged on his laptop. A new email from Bryce's account had arrived, time-stamped 10 minutes earlier. The subject line, "Not what it seems." The email contained only a password, Summit Twins 1986, and when Trent entered it into Bryce's cloud storage account, he found a folder named Insurance. Inside was a single video file showing Vivian in an intimate embrace with someone whose face remained just out of frame. Trent's blood ran cold. Before he could process this betrayal, another ping, this time from his phone. A text message from Bryce's number glowed on the screen. "I'm not dead. That's not me in the casket." Chapter 2. Whispers from the Grave. The funeral home buzzed with hushed conversations as mourners filtered past the closed casket. Trent stood robotically beside it, mechanically accepting condolences while his mind raced with questions. The text message and email had kept him awake all night, but his attempts to call Bryce's number had gone straight to voicemail. Vivian remained glued to his side, her hand possessively clutching his arm. Trent noticed how often her gaze darted to his parents, who hovered near the entrance, intercepting guests with practiced smiles that never reached their eyes. "You're very quiet," Vivian whispered, squeezing his hand. "Just processing," Trent replied, studying her features for any sign of deception. The woman he'd shared a bed with for 5 years suddenly felt like a stranger. Across the room, Dominic chatted with Trent's uncle, Wayne Prescott, a financial advisor who had always been closer to Bryce than Trent. The two men seemed engaged in serious conversation, occasionally glancing toward Trent. When the service began, Trent found himself distracted by subtle inconsistencies. The eulogies painted a version of Bryce that felt sanitized, as though his memory was being deliberately reshaped. His parents emphasized Bryce's recklessness that finally caught up with him, while glossing over his achievements and vitality. After the final prayers, as mourners proceeded to their cars for the cemetery procession, Trent's phone vibrated in his pocket. "Where are you?" he had texted earlier. Now came the reply. "Can't say. They're listening. Don't trust your wife and our parents." Trent nearly dropped the phone. His eyes darted to Vivian, who was watching him with sudden intensity. "Who's texting at a funeral?" she asked, her tone light but her eyes sharp. "Work emergency," Trent lied, pocketing the phone. "Nothing important." The graveside service passed in a blur. Trent found himself staring at the casket, wondering who, if not Bryce, lay inside. As the first handful of dirt hit the polished wood, Trent made a decision. That night, he would get answers. After the reception at his parents' suburban home, where Trent noted the conspicuous absence of personal photos of Bryce, he feigned exhaustion to escape early. Instead of driving home, he parked near the cemetery and waited for darkness. The groundskeeper was easily bribed, and by midnight, Trent stood before his brother's fresh grave with a shovel. Hours of desperate digging brought him face to face with the casket. With trembling hands, he opened it, steeling himself for what he might find. The face was indeed unrecognizable from trauma, but something about the build seemed wrong. This man was similar to Bryce in height and coloring, but subtle differences in bone structure caught Trent's trained eye. He took photographs with his phone before carefully resealing the casket and replacing the soil. Back in his car, another text arrived from Bryce's number. "Now you know. Meet tomorrow, 10 a.m. That coffee shop where we built forts. Come alone or I disappear forever." Trent drove aimlessly through the night, his world fragmenting. The coffee shop referenced was Timber Beans, where they'd spent childhood summers building elaborate forts from napkins and stir sticks while their mother worked. No one else would know that detail. When he finally returned home at dawn, Vivian was waiting, her face a mask of concern. "Where were you?" she demanded. "I called everywhere. I needed space," Trent answered coldly, "to process my brother's death." "You're covered in dirt," she observed, her eyes narrowing. "I went hiking. Bryce's favorite trail." Vivian's expression shifted subtly. "You should shower. Your parents are coming over for breakfast. They're worried about you." Trent nodded, watching how quickly she reached for her phone once he turned toward stairs. He quietly doubled back to listen. "He's acting strange," she whispered urgently. "I don't know where he went last night. Yes, I've been checking his phone, but there's nothing. The funeral went as planned, but what if he knows something? Should we move up the timeline?" Trent retreated silently, his suspicions confirmed. Whatever conspiracy had claimed his brother's identity now threatened him too. He had less than 24 hours to prepare for a meeting that could explain everything, or lead him into the same trap that had ensnared Bryce. Chapter 3. Parallel Lives. Trent arrived at Timber Beans 30 minutes early, positioning himself in a corner booth with clear sight lines to all entrances. He'd taken precautions, leaving his phone at home wrapped in Vivian's scarf, to make it appear he was still in bed, borrowing a barista's laptop for a quick search on the man he'd found in Bryce's grave, and withdrawing $5,000 in cash from an ATM far from his usual haunts. The search had yielded a disturbing discovery. The deceased was likely Lyle Mercer, a homeless veteran with a passing resemblance to the twins, reported missing 3 weeks ago. The implications twisted Trent's stomach. Someone had deliberately killed this man to stand in for Bryce. At precisely 10 a.m., a hooded figure slipped into the opposite seat, keeping his face angled away from the windows. "You were always punctual," the figure said in Bryce's voice, causing Trent's heart to lurch. "Show me your face," Trent demanded quietly. The man slowly lowered his hood, revealing Bryce's familiar features, though now sporting a beard and a jagged scar above his right eyebrow. "How do I know it's really you?" Trent whispered. "We're identical." Bryce smiled sadly. "Remember when we were 10, and you broke Mom's crystal vase? I took the blame because you'd already been grounded for setting off the smoke alarm. You promised you owed me one, a promise you still haven't paid back." Relief and fury washed over Trent simultaneously. "You let me think you were dead." "I had no choice," Bryce replied, eyes constantly scanning the cafe. "They've been planning this for years, Trent. Our loving family, your devoted wife. They're after everything we own, everything we are." For the next hour, Bryce unraveled a conspiracy so twisted that Trent would have dismissed it as paranoia if not for the evidence he'd already uncovered himself. Their parents, facing financial ruin after a series of failed investments, had concocted a scheme to consolidate the twins' considerable assets, the inheritance from their maternal grandmother, the successful architecture firm, and a valuable family lakefront property. "But why fake your death? Why not mine?" Trent asked. "Because you're the responsible one with all the business connections," Bryce explained. "They needed you functioning to maintain appearances while they executed the rest of their plan. Your signature on documents, your face in meetings." And Vivian? Bryce's expression hardened. "She was never what she seemed. I discovered she's been having an affair with Dominic for at least 2 years. They met in college. Their relationship predates your marriage. She targeted you deliberately when she learned about her family's wealth." Trent felt physically ill. "Dom? My best friend. Your business partner who's been systematically siphoning funds from the firm," Bryce confirmed. "I tracked the money to offshore accounts. The plan was elegant. After my death, the combined grief and betrayal would drive you to suicide. They even have a timetable. How would they ensure I'd kill myself?" "They wouldn't have to," Bryce said grimly. "Vivian has been adding untraceable sedatives to your evening whiskey for months, building up your tolerance. The night after my funeral, tonight, she'll increase the dose dramatically. While you're unconscious, they'll stage your suicide, complete with a note confessing to embezzlement and expressing guilt over some fictional involvement in my death." Trent's mind raced through recent memories, recognizing the signs he'd missed. Vivian's insistence on preparing his nightcap personally, his inexplicable fatigue each morning, her careful questions about life insurance, and his will. "Uncle Wayne is involved too," Bryce continued. "He's the financial architect behind everything. And our parents." His voice cracked slightly. "They sold their souls when they lost their retirement funds in his investment scheme. Sacrificing one son seemed acceptable when weighed against bankruptcy." "How did you uncover all this?" "Accidentally at first. I overheard Mom and Wayne arguing about the timeline 3 months ago. Then I noticed someone had accessed my cloud accounts. I started investigating, installing surveillance equipment in various locations. The evidence piled up until I confronted Wayne, thinking he was operating alone. That's when I realized the full scope. Why didn't you come to me immediately?" "They were watching too closely. And honestly, I wasn't sure if you were involved," Bryce admitted. "Vivian had been feeding you stories about me for years, that I was unstable, jealous of your success. I had to be certain where you stood. So you let them think they'd succeeded in killing you?" Who was the body? Bryce's eyes darkened. I didn't let anything happen to Lyle. I discovered their plan too late to save him. They chose him because of our similar build, and they knew the fall would make identification difficult. They stole my personal effects to plan on him. Trent processed this horror, his architect's mind already constructing a retribution blueprint. What's your plan now? Disappear, Bryce said. I have new identification, offshore accounts they can't access. I came back only to warn you. Trent shook his head slowly, the Holloway ruthlessness their grandmother had often noted emerging like a dormant predator awakening. No, they don't get to win. They don't get to take what's ours and destroy our lives. What are you suggesting? A counterplan, Trent said, his voice hardening. They think I'm the predictable twin, the safe one. They have no idea what I'm capable of when betrayed. Bryce studied his brother's expression, recognizing something primal reflected there, the mirror image of his own capacity for vengeance. What do you need from me? First, Trent said coldly, I need you to remain dead. Your resurrection is our nuclear option. Second, I need access to everything you've gathered, recordings, financial trails, all of it. And then, Trent's smile contained no warmth. Then we dismantle their lives piece by piece, just as methodically as they plan to destroy ours. By the time we're finished, they'll wish they'd never conceived this plot. As the twins finalized their approach, Trent felt a calm clarity descend, the same sensation he experienced when solving particularly challenging design problems. Only this time, he wasn't designing a building. He was architecting complete destruction for those who had betrayed him. Tonight, they expect to find your corpse, Bryce said soberly. What will they find instead? The beginning of their nightmare, Trent replied. They want me dead? Fine. Let them believe they've succeeded. The dead can't be threatened, but they can haunt the living until madness takes hold. Chapter 4. False Funeral. Trent returned home with a transformed mindset and a precisely calibrated plan. The architectural precision that had made him successful in business would now serve a darker purpose. He found Vivian in their bedroom, selecting a black dress from her closet with practiced solemnity. There you are, she said, feigning concern. Your parents called again. They're worried. I needed to clear my head, Trent replied, watching how her eyes tracked his movements. I think I'll have a drink before they arrive. A flash of anticipation crossed Vivian's face before she composed herself. Let me fix it for you. You've been through so much. Thank you, he said, noting how she positioned herself between him and the bar cart. Her back turned as she prepared his whiskey with 2 extra steps he wasn't meant to notice. The uncapping of a small vial, the careful stirring to dissolve its contents. When she handed him the amber liquid, their fingers brushed, and Trent marveled at how normal this moment would have seemed just days ago. Now he recognized it as attempted murder. To Bryce, he toasted, bringing the glass to his lips but not allowing the liquid to pass them. Vivian watched intently as he pretended to drink deeply, then placed the glass on the side table. He swayed slightly, blinking hard as though fighting sudden drowsiness. Are you all right? She asked, moving closer. Just tired suddenly, he slurred, allowing himself to collapse onto the bed. Through half-closed eyes, he observed her satisfied expression as she checked his pulse and breathing. She immediately made a call. It's working faster than expected. He's already out. Yes, complete unconsciousness. No, I followed the dosage exactly. Fine. Come now instead of waiting. Trent remained motionless as Vivian busied herself, occasionally checking to ensure he remained unresponsive. 20 minutes later, he heard the front door open and multiple sets of footsteps approaching. Is he out? Came Dominic's voice, followed by the sound of latex gloves snapping. Completely, Vivian confirmed. Help me position him in the bathroom. Rough hands grabbed Trent's shoulders and feet. He focused on maintaining the appearance of dead weight as they carried him to the master bathroom and propped him against the bathtub. The note? Asked a third voice, Uncle Wayne's distinctive baritone. Already printed and ready for his signature, Dominic replied. Martha and Preston are creating their alibi at the country club. They'll discover him when they come to check on him later tonight. Let's get his fingerprints on a glass and pill bottle, Wayne directed. Vivian, where's that sample of his handwriting for the signature? As they methodically staged his suicide, Trent recorded every word through the miniature device Bryce had supplied, the same type his brother had used to uncover their conspiracy. He endured their dispassionate discussion of his life's value, Vivian's complaints about having to play the grieving wife again, and Dominic's eager plans for the firm once Trent was gone. The police won't look too deeply, Wayne assured them. 2 brothers dying within days, one in an accident, one by suicide. It's tragic but not suspicious, especially with the embezzlement confession providing motive. When do we get access to the accounts? Vivian asked, the naked greed in her voice stripping away any doubt about her motives. Once the will clears probate, Wayne explained. Preston and Martha inherit everything as his parents, then they'll transfer the agreed-upon percentages. The architecture firm goes to Dominic as the surviving partner. And the life insurance? Dominic pressed. $3 million to Vivian, Wayne confirmed. Clean and untraceable to the rest of us. Eventually, they completed their macabre tableau. Trent slumped against the bathtub, an empty pill bottle nearby, the forged suicide note placed prominently on the counter. They left together, already discussing how to act appropriately shocked when the body was discovered. The moment they departed, Trent sprang into action. He had 3 hours before his parents would arrive to find him. Moving quickly, he gathered the evidence, the drugged whiskey for toxicology testing, the staged suicide note, and most importantly, the full audio recording of the conspiracy. He replaced these items with his own carefully prepared counterparts. A different suicide note with subtle but significant alterations, a whiskey glass with only his normal fingerprints, and a bathroom scene that would pass initial inspection but contain deliberate inconsistencies that would raise questions in a thorough investigation. Then he slipped out through a passage he'd secretly built during renovations, an architect's privilege, and made his way to the prearranged meeting point where Bryce waited with supplies for the next phase. Everything's set, Bryce asked when Trent arrived at the remote cabin they'd purchased off-record years earlier. They performed exactly as expected, Trent confirmed grimly, right down to discussing how to divide the spoils. So what now? We released the evidence to the police. Trent shook his head, his expression hardening. No, that would be too merciful. They'd face legal consequences, perhaps prison, but they'd understand their punishment. They'd have closure. He paced the small cabin, energy radiating from him. I want them to experience what they intended for us, the gradual destruction of everything they value, the constant fear of what comes next, the inability to trust anyone around them. You've always been the planner, Bryce said, recognizing the dangerous brilliance emerging in his twin. What's our first move? We let them believe they've won. Trent explained. My body will be discovered tonight. The police will initially investigate it as a suicide. Our parents, Vivian, Dominic, and Wayne will play their roles as grieving family. And then, Trent's smile was cold. Then Ghost Protocol begins. While they're celebrating their success, we systematically dismantle their plan from the shadows. We've already secured our assets through the trust restructuring you implemented. The money they expect to receive doesn't exist. They'll panic when they realize it's gone, Bryce noted. Exactly, and that's when they'll start turning on each other. Wayne will blame our parents for providing incorrect information. Dominic will suspect Vivian of double-crossing him. Vivian will wonder if our parents kept additional assets hidden. Throughout the night, the twins refined their counter-conspiracy, allocating responsibilities based on their complementary skills. Bryce, now officially dead, would work completely from the shadows, while Trent would implement Phase 2, the false resurrection. The following morning, as expected, headlines announced the tragic suicide of Trent Holloway, just days after his twin brother's fatal accident. The article noted that Trent was survived by his loving wife and parents, who were too devastated to comment. A sidebar mentioned that his business partner, Dominic Russo, would assume control of their architecture firm. Watching the news coverage from their secure location, Trent felt strangely liberated. Legally dead with all my faculties intact. It's an interesting position to operate from. The ultimate freedom, Bryce agreed. No one looks for a dead man. 3 days later, as Trent's funeral proceedings began, the conspirators received their first shock. The family lawyer, summoned for the reading of Trent's will, presented a document dramatically different from what they'd anticipated. This revised will, dated just 2 weeks ago, leaves everything to a blind trust. The bewildered lawyer explained to the stunned gathering. Mr. Holloway's explicit instructions were that no distributions can be made until certain conditions are met. What conditions? Preston demanded, his facade of grief slipping. I'm not at liberty to disclose that information, the lawyer replied. The trustee has sole discretion. Who's the trustee? Martha asked sharply. That information is also confidential. As the conspirators reeled from this setback, more surprises awaited. Dominic discovered that his access to the firm's accounts had been restricted, with major clients receiving notifications that all projects were on hold pending a transition review. Vivian, meanwhile, learned that Trent's life insurance policy had been changed to name a charitable foundation as beneficiary, a foundation investigating traumatic brain injuries in homeless veterans. The first phase of Trent's counterattack was complete. Now, as the conspirators scrambled to understand what had happened to their expected windfall, he prepared to implement the second phase, sowing discord among their ranks. Chapter 5. Phantom Manipulator. From the shadows of legal death, Trent orchestrated a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Using untraceable methods, he began sending each conspirator evidence suggesting another member of their group had betrayed them. Vivian received an anonymous envelope containing bank statements showing Dominic had opened a private account in the Caymans, an account Trent had actually created using information from Dominic's computer. The statements suggested Dominic had been planning to take all the proceeds for himself. Dominic, meanwhile, found documents implying that Uncle Wayne had restructured the expected inheritance to shortchange him significantly. The convincing forgeries, created using Wayne's letterhead and signature style, outlined a secret arrangement between Wayne and the Holloways that excluded both Dominic and Vivian. Wayne received information suggesting Preston and Martha had established a separate agreement with Vivian, planning to frame him as the mastermind if anything went wrong. The fabricated evidence included recorded phone conversations that Trent had carefully edited from actual calls. Preston and Martha Holloway weren't spared either. They received materials indicating Vivian had been working with investigators, preparing to turn state's evidence against them in exchange for immunity. Within a week, the conspiracy began fracturing along the fault lines Trent had identified. Their communications, which he still monitored through Bryce's surveillance equipment, revealed growing suspicion and hostility. I know what you're doing, Vivian hissed at Dominic during a meeting at her home. You thought I wouldn't find out about the Cayman account? What are you talking about? Dominic responded, genuinely confused. And what about your deal with Preston and Martha? Were you planning to throw me to the wolves? At the Holloway residence, similar accusations flew between Wayne and the senior Holloways. After everything I've done for this family, Wayne shouted, waving the fabricated evidence. You plan to make me the scapegoat? That's absurd, Preston retorted. We should be asking why the assets we were promised have vanished. You were in charge of the financial arrangements. The beauty of Trent's strategy lay in its psychological foundation. Each piece of false evidence contained enough truth to be believable and referenced events or conversations that had actually occurred, making denial seem like further deception. While the conspirators turned on each other, Trent implemented the next phase of his plan. Using carefully constructed digital trails, he began triggering investigations into their legitimate business activities. Anonymous tips led tax authorities to examine Wayne's client accounts. Building inspectors suddenly took interest in projects Dominic had managed, discovering numerous code violations that would cost millions to rectify. Meanwhile, Bryce worked on a parallel track, establishing connections with individuals the conspirators had wronged in the past. Former clients of Wayne who had lost money in his investment schemes. Ex-employees Dominic had cheated out of commissions. The contractor Preston had once framed for structural failures in a development project. These aggrieved parties, provided with evidence of their abusers' vulnerabilities, began pursuing long-abandoned legal claims with renewed vigor. By the third week, the conspirators were under siege from multiple directions. fighting among themselves while defending against external threats they didn't understand. Their resources, which had seemed so secure, were being drained by legal fees and emergency measures. Throughout this chaos, Trent remained unseen, monitoring developments through surveillance feeds in a secure apartment he'd established under a false identity. The architectural mind that had once designed harmonious spaces now crafted perfect discord. "They're breaking faster than anticipated," he noted to Bryce during one of their secure communications. Dominic and Vivian had a physical altercation yesterday. She accused him of embezzling from the company accounts. "Wayne isn't faring much better," Bryce replied. "The SEC has frozen his assets pending investigation, and 3 former clients have filed suit claiming he mismanaged their investments. He called our parents demanding money for legal representation, but they claimed they're cash-strapped from unexpected tax audits." Trent allowed himself a cold smile. "Time for the next phase, then. Are you ready to rise from the dead?" Bryce hesitated. "Are you sure it's the right moment? Once we deploy this, there's no going back." "Their alliance is fractured, but not shattered," Trent reasoned. "They still haven't faced their fundamental fear, that their victims might return for retribution. Let's introduce that variable." The following day, as Vivian entered her darkened home after a contentious meeting with her in-laws, she found a single item placed on her kitchen counter: Bryce's distinctive titanium watch, the one supposedly buried with his body. Beside it lay a note in handwriting chillingly similar to Trent's. "Did you really think we wouldn't know?" Across town, Dominic returned to his penthouse to find his computer turned on, displaying surveillance footage of himself and the others planning Trent's suicide. The footage was playing on a continuous loop, with one segment highlighted, Dominic saying, "Once Trent's gone, there'll be no one to challenge us." Preston and Martha Holloway received the most direct message, a delivery containing the blood-stained hiking gear allegedly found on Bryce's body, accompanied by soil samples from Trent's grave. Wayne, perhaps the most vulnerable psychologically, received nothing but a single text message from an unknown number. "Twins see everything. Judgment comes twice." The effect was electric. Within hours, the conspirators' communications revealed full-blown panic. "Someone knows," Vivian screamed during an emergency meeting at the Holloway home. "They have evidence. They're watching us." "It's impossible," Preston insisted, though his shaking hands betrayed his terror. "Both of them are dead. We confirmed it." "Did we?" Wayne challenged. "Did any of us actually see the bodies up close? Really examine them?" "I did," Dominic said defensively. "I helped position Trent. He wasn't breathing. No pulse." "And Bryce?" Martha asked, her voice barely audible. The coroner said the face was unidentifiable. The seed of doubt had been planted. Now, Trent prepared to make it bloom into paralyzing fear. Chapter 6: Reflections in Blood. On the 1-month anniversary of his supposed suicide, Trent enacted the most psychologically devastating phase of his plan: the phantom resurrection. Using makeup techniques, subtle facial prosthetics, and a natural advantage of being identical to Bryce, he created a hybrid appearance that would register to observers as both brothers simultaneously, a visual manifestation of their worst fears. His first appearance was precisely calculated for maximum impact. During a board meeting at the architecture firm, where Dominic was attempting to reassure nervous clients about the company's stability, Trent stood silently outside the glass-walled conference room, visible just long enough for Dominic to notice before disappearing. Dominic's reaction, leaping from his chair mid-sentence, face draining of color, created exactly the impression of instability Trent had intended. When security searched the building at Dominic's insistence, they found nothing except a business card from Trent's personal collection placed in Dominic's private bathroom. For Vivian, the haunting took a more intimate form. Returning from a spa weekend she'd taken to escape mounting pressures, she found her bedroom meticulously rearranged to match the configuration from the day she married Trent. On her pillow lay a dried flower from her wedding bouquet that should have been sealed in a memory box in storage. Most disturbing was what she found in her bathroom: her extensive makeup collection reorganized, with certain items used to write across her mirror, Behind every face is another. Preston and Martha experienced their visitation during a therapy session they'd reluctantly agreed to attend, struggling to maintain their facade of grieving parents. Through the office window, they both clearly saw a figure with Bryce's stance but Trent's haircut, watching them before stepping into passing traffic and vanishing. Their therapist noted their simultaneous reaction as a shared grief hallucination. But the business card they found in their car afterward, identical to the one Dominic had received, confirmed the experience had been no hallucination. Wayne, already under investigation and increasingly isolated, received the most direct confrontation. Returning to his office after a grueling deposition, he found a man sitting in his chair, back turned, silhouette unmistakable. "Hello, Uncle Wayne," said Trent, using vocal techniques to blend his voice with recordings of Bryce's. "Surprised to see me?" Wayne stumbled backward, clutching his chest. "You're dead. Both of you. Are we?" Trent turned slowly, the careful prosthetics and makeup creating an unsettling hybrid of both twins' features. "Or did you just wish you was dead? What do you want?" Wayne gasped, fumbling for heart medication in his desk drawer. "Justice has many forms," Trent replied cryptically. "Some legal, some personal. We thought you deserved to experience both." Before Wayne could respond, Trent activated a small device that cut power to the office. In the momentary darkness, he vanished through a route he'd mapped in advance, leaving behind only a USB drive labeled Confessions that contained recordings of all the conspirators discussing their roles. The psychological effect of these appearances shattered what remained of the conspirators' unity. Dominic, convinced he was being haunted, resigned from the firm and attempted to flee to Mexico, only to be detained at the airport on charges of financial fraud that mysteriously appeared in the system moments before his departure. Vivian barricaded herself in a hotel suite, refusing contact with the others and hiring private security who reported she spent hours staring at mirrors, sometimes conversing with her reflection. Preston and Martha turned on Wayne, accusing him of masterminding a complex fraud against them all. Their allegations, delivered to authorities in a desperate attempt to secure leniency, provided the final piece of Trent's legal strategy. Within 6 weeks of beginning his campaign, Trent had systematically dismantled the conspiracy without directly engaging law enforcement. The conspirators, driven by fear and suspicion, had effectively destroyed themselves and each other. "It's almost too perfect," Bryce commented when they met to evaluate their progress. "They're experiencing exactly what they planned for us. The destruction of everything they value, followed by legal consequences they can't escape." "Almost perfect," Trent agreed, reviewing updates on their targets. "But psychological torture and legal jeopardy aren't enough. They try to take our lives. Now we need to deliver the final judgment, one that can never be traced back to us." Bryce studied his brother's expression, recognizing the implacable resolve that had always differentiated them. While Bryce's anger burned hot and fast, Trent's smoldered beneath the surface, building to an inferno that nothing could extinguish. "What are you planning?" Bryce asked quietly. Trent's smile was terrifying in its calmness. "Something fitting. Something that gives them exactly what they wanted, just not how they wanted it." As they finalized the details of their endgame, Trent reflected on how completely he had shed his former identity. The reasonable, methodical architect was gone, replaced by something colder and more dangerous. A man who had stared into the abyss of betrayal and emerged transformed. "They wanted us dead and forgotten," he told Bryce. "Instead, they'll be the ones history forgets, while we build new lives from the ashes of their destruction." Chapter 7. Confession and Collapse. The annual charity gala at Seattle's Westbrook Hotel represented everything the conspirators had aspired to: wealth, social standing, and respectability. It was also where Trent chose to orchestrate their final downfall. Despite their deteriorating circumstances, all 5 conspirators attended, each for different reasons. Preston and Martha Holloway needed to maintain appearances among their social circle. Dominic, released on bail pending his fraud trial, desperately sought investors to salvage his reputation. Vivian, emerging briefly from seclusion, came to secure potential allies. Wayne, nearly broken by investigations and stress, had been specifically pressured to attend by anonymous messages threatening further exposure if he refused. None of them knew that Trent had methodically prepared this event as the stage for their collective unmasking. Using his architectural connections, he had gained access to the hotel systems weeks earlier, establishing control over the audiovisual equipment in the main ballroom. The gala proceeded normally through cocktails and dinner, the conspirators avoiding each other while maintaining brittle smiles for the benefit of observers. As the event chairman approached the podium for closing remarks, Trent activated his program remotely. The lights dimmed unexpectedly, and the massive screens flanking the stage, intended for acknowledging donors, came to life with a simple message: the truth about the Holloway twins. What followed was a masterfully edited compilation of the conspirators' own words, snippets from meetings, phone calls, and private conversations, all meticulously captured by Bryce's surveillance. The footage revealed their entire plot in devastating detail: the planned accidents, the financial motivations, the callous disregard for the lives they'd sought to destroy. The assembled elite of Seattle society watched in stunned silence as people they'd respected and admired were exposed as would-be murderers and frauds. Security personnel moved to shut down the presentation, but found the systems locked and unresponsive. For 8 excruciating minutes, the conspiracy unraveled publicly and irrefutably. The final segment showed the staged suicide scene, with Dominic and Vivian callously positioning what they believed was Trent's unconscious body while discussing how to divide his assets. As the screens finally went dark, the ballroom erupted in chaos. Attendees backed away from the conspirators as though physically repelled. Security personnel, responding to urgent directives from hotel management, discreetly surrounded them. Preston collapsed, clutching his chest in what appeared to be a heart attack. Martha stood frozen, her carefully maintained social mask shattered beyond repair. Dominic attempted to flee, but was intercepted by police officers who had been anonymously tipped to attend the event. Vivian, cornered near the service entrance, screamed accusations at Wayne, who sat slumped at his table, staring vacantly at his trembling hands. From a service corridor with a clear view of the ballroom, Trent watched the destruction he'd engineered. The real triumph wasn't just public humiliation. It was the comprehensive legal evidence contained in the presentation. Copies had simultaneously been delivered to law enforcement agencies, regulatory authorities, and select journalists, ensuring that no amount of money or influence could suppress the truth. As sirens wailed outside the hotel, Trent slipped away, his burner phone vibrating with a message from Bryce: justice served. Time for rebirth. The following days saw the complete collapse of the conspirators' world. Dominic, already facing fraud charges, now confronted attempted murder and conspiracy allegations. Vivian, initially claiming victimhood, found her performance undermined by clear video evidence of her active participation. Wayne suffered a debilitating stroke during initial questioning, rendering him physically incapacitated though legally accountable. Preston, surviving his heart attack, and Martha both attempted to shift blame to the others but found themselves isolated and universally condemned. Their legal strategy disintegrated when their own attorneys, disgusted by the evidence, withdrew representation. Public fascination with the case spread nationally, with commentators dubbing it the twin deception. Speculation ran rampant about whether one or both Holloway twins might still be alive, with reported sightings emerging across the country and beyond. Through it all, Trent remained ghost-like, monitoring developments from secure locations while finalizing preparations for his ultimate transition. The legal death of Trent Holloway had provided unexpected freedom, the opportunity to reconstruct himself entirely. "Are you satisfied?" Bryce asked during their last meeting on American soil. "They've lost everything: freedom, reputation, wealth." Trent considered the question seriously. "Not entirely. There's one final judgment they deserve. One that parallels what they planned for us, but with our signature twist. What more could you possibly do to them?" Trent's expression remained impassive. "They wanted us isolated, despairing, and ultimately dead. I want them to live long lives, contemplating what they've lost and knowing that somewhere we're thriving because of their failure. It was the architect's final design, not a death sentence, but something more psychologically devastating. The knowledge that their victims had not only survived, but would perpetually remain just beyond reach, living well while they rotted in prison cells. As the legal system processed the conspirators, Trent implemented the final phase of his plan, one that would ensure they received precisely calibrated sentences reflecting their culpability. Anonymous tips directed investigators to additional evidence, while strategic leaks to prosecutors highlighted particularly damning aspects of each conspirator's involvement. The result was exactly as he'd engineered. Dominic received 20 years for conspiracy, attempted murder, and financial crimes. Vivian, 15 years with no possibility of parole until serving at least 12. Preston and Martha, 12 years each, ensuring they would likely die in prison given their ages and health. Wayne, deemed mentally unfit for trial after his stroke, was committed to a secure medical facility for the remainder of his life, a prison of physical limitation and mental awareness. With justice secured, Trent prepared for his final disappearance. The man who emerged would bear no resemblance to either Trent or Bryce Holloway, physically, legally, or psychologically. The twins who had been targeted for destruction would instead rise transformed, their betrayers left to contemplate their absolute failure. Chapter 8. Ashes and Rebirth. 6 months after the spectacular public exposure at the charity gala, a distinguished man with salt and pepper hair and subtle facial alterations sat at a cafe terrace in Barcelona, reviewing architectural plans for a revolutionary community center. Known locally as Sebastian Vega, he had quickly established himself as an innovative designer unbound by conventional limitations. Few would connect this confident professional with either of the Holloway twins, presumed dead by most of the world. The surgical alterations, while maintaining his fundamental bone structure, had changed his appearance just enough to pass casual scrutiny. New documentation, secured through carefully cultivated international connections, provided an unassailable identity. Sebastian's phone vibrated with a secure message from his brother, now living as Miguel Vega in Buenos Aires, where he'd established a successful adventure tourism company. The message contained a news article about the conspirators' appeals being unanimously rejected by the Washington State Supreme Court. Final closure, the message concluded. Have you found peace? Sebastian considered the question while watching pedestrians navigate the historic plaza. Had he found peace? The ruthless campaign of destruction he'd orchestrated had succeeded beyond expectation. The conspirators were serving their sentences, financially ruined and socially ostracized. His brother was thriving in his new identity. Their considerable assets had been transferred through untraceable channels, ensuring comfortable futures. Yet something remained unresolved, not regret, but a lingering sense that personal justice, while necessary, had revealed uncomfortable truths about his own nature. Found something more valuable than peace, Sebastian replied. Clarity. The transformation from Trent Holloway to Sebastian Vega represented more than physical alteration or legal reinvention. It acknowledged the emergence of something that had always existed beneath Trent's carefully constructed persona, a capacity for calculated ruthlessness that matched or exceeded anything his enemies had demonstrated. This revelation neither troubled nor pleased him. It simply was a reality to be recognized and integrated rather than denied. The man who had meticulously dismantled 5 lives understood himself now with unprecedented clarity. While establishing his new practice in Barcelona, Sebastian periodically received updates about the conspirators through carefully maintained surveillance channels. Their degradation continued even within the prison system. Dominic, once charismatic and commanding, had become a hollow-eyed shell after multiple assaults by fellow inmates who despised child-targeting criminals. Vivian's beauty, her primary currency, faded rapidly under the harsh conditions of incarceration. Preston suffered a second, more severe heart attack that left him partially paralyzed, dependent on Martha for basic functions. The ultimate irony, The couple that had conspired to eliminate their sons for financial gain now found themselves chained together by medical necessity, mutual contempt growing with each passing day. Wayne, perhaps suffering the cruelest fate, retained enough cognitive function to understand his circumstances but lacked the physical capability to communicate effectively. Reports from the secure medical facility indicated he often stared at televisions when news segments about the case aired, his eyes reflecting complete comprehension of his downfall. Sebastian received these reports without emotion, filing them mentally alongside architectural specifications and design constraints. Simply information to be processed, not celebrated or mourned. His new life developed rhythms entirely separate from his past. The architectural philosophy he now pursued emphasized restoration and transformation rather than the sleek modernism that had characterized Trent Holloway's work. Sebastian Vega specialized in reimagining damaged structures, preserving their essential elements while reconstructing them into something entirely new, an approach that mirrored his personal metamorphosis. On the anniversary of his supposed suicide, Sebastian accepted a commission to redesign a historic building damaged by fire, a project other architects had deemed too challenging. The symmetry pleased him. He had emerged from his own conflagration, transformed rather than destroyed. That evening, he dined at an exclusive restaurant overlooking the Mediterranean. His table companion, a prominent judge with the International Criminal Court, represented another careful step in establishing Sebastian Vega's credentials and connections. "Your reputation grows interesting," the judge commented between courses. A newcomer with no notable history who nevertheless demonstrates exceptional understanding of structural integrity and transformation. "One might wonder about your previous experiences." Sebastian smiled, the expression perfectly calibrated to suggest intrigue without revealing substance. "The most valuable experiences often leave no public record. Wouldn't you agree?" The conversation shifted to architectural theory, but beneath the professional discourse lay Sebastian's constant awareness of his dual nature, the creator and destroyer existing in perfect balance. The man who had engineered both buildings and ruination with equal precision. Later that night, alone in his minimalist apartment overlooking the Gothic Quarter, Sebastian reviewed preliminary sketches for his latest project when his secure phone indicated an incoming video call from Miguel. His brother's face, also subtly altered but instantly recognizable to Sebastian, appeared on screen. "They're making a documentary about the case," Miguel announced without preamble. "International production, major distribution. They're portraying us as victims who likely didn't survive." "Convenient," Sebastian replied. "Additional insulation for our current identities." Miguel studied his brother's expression. "You seem completely at peace with everything. Even after what we did to them." "We did nothing they hadn't planned for us," Sebastian responded evenly. "We simply executed more effectively." "That's technically true, but—" Miguel hesitated. "Sometimes I wonder if we went too far. Not with them. They deserved everything. But with ourselves, what we became in the process." Sebastian considered this thoughtfully. "We became what we always were, just without illusions." The capacity for calculated destruction existed in both of us. They merely catalyzed its emergence. "And that doesn't disturb you? Should understanding one's self be disturbing?" Sebastian countered. "I see it as clarity. They sought to eliminate us because they underestimated what we were capable of. Their fundamental miscalculation." The brothers discussed practical matters before ending the call, but Miguel's question lingered in Sebastian's mind. Had they gone too far? Had the architect of vengeance overbuilt his structure? The question itself revealed the primary difference between the twins. Bryce, now Miguel, still measured himself against external moral frameworks, seeking validation or condemnation from abstract principles. Trent, now Sebastian, recognized only effectiveness and intention as meaningful metrics. What they had done was exactly what the situation demanded. No more, no less. The precision of the response pleased the architect in him. The conspirators had received penalties proportional to their actions, delivered through mechanisms they themselves had initiated. As Sebastian returned to his designs, He reflected that his greatest creation wasn't any building or destruction plot. It was himself, redesigned and reconstructed from the foundation up. The ruthless clarity that had emerged during his campaign of vengeance now served different ends, but remained fundamentally unchanged, a willingness to see systems as they truly operated and manipulate them accordingly. The conspirators had sought to destroy him using society's blind spots and procedural vulnerabilities. He had turned those same mechanisms against them, then stepped beyond the entire system to reinvent himself completely. Sebastian Vega represented not just survival, but transcendence, the ultimate architectural achievement of Trent Holloway's final design. Chapter 9. Echoes and Resolution. 5 years after assuming his new identity, Sebastian Vega received an unexpected message through one of the secure channels he maintained for monitoring the conspirators. Dominic Russo, broken by years of imprisonment and declining health, had requested a meeting with the prosecutor who had handled the case. Intrigued, Sebastian accessed the conversation recording through carefully placed connections in the judicial system. Dominic, barely recognizable from his formerly polished appearance, sat hunched across from the prosecutor, his prison pallor accentuated by premature aging. "I need to confess something that wasn't in the original case," Dominic began, his voice hoarse. "Something about the Holloway twins." The prosecutor leaned forward. "We've established your role in the conspiracy quite thoroughly, Mr. Russo. What could you possibly add now?" "The truth about Bryce Holloway's body," Dominic replied. "It wasn't him in that casket. We paid a morgue attendant to provide a John Doe with similar build. The face was deliberately damaged post-mortem to prevent identification." Sebastian watched impassively as Dominic detailed the body-switching operation, confirming what he already knew, but raising a more interesting question. Why confess this particular aspect now? "So you're admitting to additional charges of corpse desecration and obstruction of justice," the prosecutor noted. "Why come forward with this after 5 years?" Dominic's expression reflected something beyond fear or remorse, a haunted quality that transcended physical confinement. "Because they're still out there," he whispered. "Both of them, watching us, punishing us." "Mr. Russo, both Holloway twins were declared legally dead years ago. There's been no evidence." "I've seen them," Dominic interrupted frantically. "Not directly, but their influence. The guard who specifically requested transfer to my cell block has Trent's exact posture and mannerisms. The new prison psychologist who interviews me monthly uses Bryce's distinctive phrases. They're toying with us, making sure we never forget, never feel safe." The prosecutor sighed, clearly interpreting this as prison-induced paranoia. "I'll make note of your additional confession, but I suggest you discuss these perceptions with your mental health provider." What the prosecutor dismissed as delusion, Sebastian recognized as the final success of his psychological warfare. He had indeed arranged for certain prison personnel to subtly mimic mannerisms and expressions from both twins, not through any direct connection, but through intermediaries who simply paid specific guards and administrators to incorporate certain behaviors around the conspirators. The haunting continued precisely as designed, invisible to anyone except the targets themselves. Each conspirator experienced personalized torments. Preston received regular letters containing quotes from favorite books he'd read to his sons, written in handwriting that mimicked his own. Martha's cell periodically contained objects from the twins' childhood, impossible to source within prison walls. Vivian found her personal items rearranged in patterns only she would recognize as significant. None could prove these occurrences to authorities, creating exactly the doubt about their own sanity that Sebastian had intended. The physical imprisonment was merely the container. The real punishment was psychological, perpetual uncertainty about what was real and what was manipulation. Watching Dominic's desperate confession, Sebastian felt neither satisfaction nor remorse, only the clean certainty of a well-executed design reaching its intended function. The man who had helped position his unconscious body for staged suicide now lived in perpetual fear of ghosts who were simultaneously dead and everywhere. Later that week, Sebastian flew to Buenos Aires for one of his occasional reunions with Miguel. His brother had built a successful life, incorporating his natural love for adventure, leading exclusive wilderness expeditions for wealthy clients seeking authentic experiences. Unlike Sebastian, who maintained studious surveillance of their former enemies, Miguel had largely disconnected from their past. "You're still monitoring them," Miguel noted as they shared dinner at his hillside home overlooking the city. "After all this time, why?" Sebastian considered the question while savoring an excellent Malbec. Architectural integrity requires monitoring structural performance over time. It's professional thoroughness, not emotional investment. Miguel laughed, the sound carrying the warmth that distinguished him from his brother even before their transformations. "You've turned ruthlessness into a philosophy. Sometimes I barely recognize the Trent I grew up with." "That person no longer exists," Sebastian replied simply. "Just as Bryce doesn't. We're who we chose to become instead of who they tried to make us." "And who exactly is Sebastian Vega?" Miguel challenged gently. "The man who builds remarkable structures by day and orchestrates psychological torture by night." Sebastian didn't bristle at the characterization. "Someone who understands that justice and legality aren't synonymous. The system they attempted to use against us is fundamentally limited, designed to process violations according to standardized metrics rather than truly address harm. So you've appointed yourself judge and executioner." "Observer," Sebastian corrected. "I simply ensure they experience the consequences they design for others. The psychological framework they constructed for our destruction now contains them instead." Miguel studied his brother, recognition and concern mingling in his expression. "Have you considered that this ongoing involvement connects you to them permanently? That true freedom might mean letting go entirely." The question lingered between them, uncharacteristically penetrating Sebastian's carefully maintained equilibrium. Had his meticulous surveillance become its own form of prison? Did his continued orchestration of their suffering represent control or subconscious attachment? "Perhaps," Sebastian acknowledged, surprising both himself and Miguel with the concession. "But completion requires verification. I need certainty that the structure stands independently before I disconnect." Later that night, unable to sleep, Sebastian stood on Miguel's terrace contemplating the distant lights of Buenos Aires. His brother's question had uncovered something he'd avoided examining. The possibility that his continued involvement with the conspirators represented not justice, but inability to transcend the defining trauma of his previous identity. True architectural mastery involved not just creation, but eventual separation. The moment when the designer steps away, allowing the structure to exist independently. Had he reached that point with his elaborate punishment system, or was he maintaining unnecessary connections? The question followed Sebastian back to Barcelona, infiltrating his thoughts during design sessions and client meetings. For the first time since implementing his vengeance, he found himself distracted by philosophical rather than practical considerations. The resolution came unexpectedly, during a meeting with potential clients seeking to transform an abandoned prison into a community art center. As Sebastian toured the facility, observing the psychological impact of the space, the intentional disorientation, the subtle reinforcement of powerlessness through architectural cues, he recognized the parallel to his own creation. He had constructed a perfect prison for the conspirators, one that existed primarily in their minds, but was no less confining for its intangibility. The question wasn't whether it functioned as designed, but whether its continued operation served any purpose beyond habit. That evening, Sebastian made a decision that surprised even himself. He systematically terminated the surveillance systems and influence networks he'd maintained for years, not from mercy or regret, but from the clean certainty of an architect who recognizes when a structure is complete. The conspirators would continue experiencing their personalized haunting through established patterns and their own psychological conditioning, but without his active involvement. The machine would run independently until it wound down naturally or they ceased to exist, whichever came first. His final act was reviewing a comprehensive file he'd maintained on each conspirator's destruction. Vivian, once obsessed with physical appearance, now showed signs of accelerated aging from stress and prison conditions. Dominic, whose confidence had been his defining characteristic, now jumped at shadows and trusted no one. Preston and Martha, separated into different facilities after Preston's medical emergency, communicated through increasingly bitter letters that revealed their mutual contempt. Wayne, perhaps experiencing the most fitting consequence, had regained speech capability but lost short-term memory function. He repeatedly experienced the shock of learning about his circumstances as if for the first time, trapped in an endless loop of realization and horror. Sebastian closed the files permanently, transferring them to a secure server that would automatically delete all contents after a predetermined period. The architect of vengeance had completed his masterwork, a self-sustaining system of consequences that required no further input. 1 year later, Sebastian stood at the opening ceremony for his most acclaimed project, the transformation of a damaged historical structure into a breathtaking community space that honored its original elements while creating something entirely new. As journalists praised his revolutionary approach to architectural redemption, Sebastian recognized the unintentional accuracy of their assessment. He had indeed perfected the art of redemption, not through forgiveness or restoration, but through complete transformation. The damaged structure of his former identity had been neither discarded nor simply repaired, but fundamentally reimagined into something more powerful and true. Miguel joined him for the celebration, their subtle physical alterations allowing them to appear together without raising connections to the Holloway twins. As they shared a private moment away from the crowds, Miguel asked the question that had lingered between them. "Have you finally let them go?" Sebastian nodded, the motion conveying finality. "The design is complete. Further involvement would be redundant." "And what comes next for the architect of perfect vengeance?" Miguel asked, only half joking. Sebastian surveyed the celebration around them, acknowledging the irony that his greatest professional triumph had emerged from the same capacity for transformative vision that had enabled his elaborate retribution. "Creation without limitation," he replied simply. The twins died, so Sebastian could build without constraints of history or identity. That seems like adequate compensation for attempted murder. As the brothers shared a rare moment of genuine laughter, Sebastian recognized that his journey from Trent Holloway to Sebastian Vega represented not just survival or revenge, but evolution. The emergence of something that incorporated elements of his past while transcending its limitations entirely. The conspirators remained in their various prisons, both physical and psychological, condemned by their own actions rather than external judgment. Sebastian had simply ensured the punishment perfectly reflected the crime. Attempted murder of identity had resulted in complete destruction of their own. Justice, Sebastian concluded, wasn't about restoration or even balance. It was about transformation, the alchemical process that converted betrayal and destruction into the foundation for something entirely new. The twins hadn't survived. They had transcended, leaving behind both their would-be murderers and their former selves. In this final victory, Sebastian found something unexpected, not forgiveness or closure, but freedom from the very need for either. The architect had created his masterpiece, and now stood apart from it, ready to build anew. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.